All right, hello everyone. Let's stick this up here. And we're going to continue polypainting this wasp creature type deal. And I want to work on the abdomen today. Last week I spent a lot of time on the thorax and finished up the head and the eyes. So let's take a look here. Let's get rid of this awful gradient in the background. Maybe make it more of a like gray so you can see the silhouette. And I'm going to switch over to the paintbrush. So opening up the brush library here, I'm going to press P and then A for the paintbrush. I'm going to hold the shift key and turn off Z add for smooth and just leave RGB on so it becomes a blur brush. Bring down the RGB intensity, maybe like 70 or something like that. And let's focus on a few things. So I'm going to turn off some of the legs here, and I want to do the abdomen. And the idea that I have for the abdomen is that I'm going to make it kind of like bright red, like a black that fades to bright red. Where are my wings here? It's I didn't lean those, so let's turn off the wings. There we go. And expand the abdomen, and I'm going to select the abdomen here. And let's see. There we go. So, let's see. So the abdomen is about 5 million points. I think that's enough. Should be plenty for poly painting. Hello, everyone. And I'm going to sample some of the color that I used for the eye here to be kind of consistent color-wise. So I'm going to press C for the sample the color. Maybe bring this up a little bit. And go over here, and I'm going to do RGB is set to 100. I'm going to do color fill object to fill it entirely with red. Well, you see that little white dot there, that's the interior part. So I'm going to, let's turn on transparency. It's a little bit too big. So I'm going to press W for the gizmo and just shrink it down a little bit. I just want something on the inside there to kind of block light from going all the way through. May not be necessary, I might get rid of it later. But right now it's not hurting anything, so I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to Q for draw. Let's do some masking. So I'll start with some cavity mask. So mask by cavity. And I'm going to invert that mask. Control I, Control H to hide it. And then I'll just pick a very dark, almost black, and do color fill object just to get a little detail in there. Let's bring down the RGB intensity for the paintbrush. And I'm going to bring up the size here. A little trick you can use if you go to the brush palette, and let's say you want to have the smooth brush, or in this case the blur brush, be a little bit larger than your draw. You can go into the brush palette and under smooth brush modifiers, excuse me, increase the alt brush size. And that way, whenever I hold the shift key, you see how the brush size gets larger. Sometimes when I'm poly painting, I like to do that so that it just kind of blurs out more area that I'm painting. It's just an interesting option that you can try. The other thing is these are all different poly groups. So I'm going to go into the brush palette, and under auto masking, I'm going to turn up mask by poly groups. This is kind of one of those sliders that I think is really helpful, so I might actually add it to my interface. I just upgraded my ZBrush finally, and I forgot to keep my preferences. So my preferences are set back to the default, but that's okay. It gives me an opportunity just to remind you guys if you don't know how you can customize the interface. So go into preferences under config and enable customize, and then I'm going to go into brush, and Control Alt drag mask by polygroups down here. And then I'll go, let's bring it all the way over just to be neat. And then I'll go to Preferences, turn off Enable Customize, and choose Store Config. And that way this will appear next time I load up ZBrush right there. So that just makes it easier as I'm painting on each of these sections here. The paint doesn't necessarily spill over from one section to the next, but I don't want it to, because they're all different polygroups. So it's kind of a nice setting to have on there. So I'm just kind of, just like getting a little under, a little bit of detail here that I'm going to paint on top of, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So that it looks like there's just, levels of detail on the surface. I mean, levels of colors, sort of like, it's like doing almost like a subsurface type deal. It's a little bit more obvious as I continue to do this, why I'm doing that kind of thing. But I also want some darkness here in the pitting of the pits that I drew on here. And if I bring my reference back, you can see this is kind of the look that I'm going for right here in terms of the detail. Excuse me. I'm going to go back to masking. Let's clear the mask. Control drag and release to clear the mask. And let's do mask by smoothness. And I'm going to hide that mask. And this time, let's choose, C to choose the color. I'm going to go for a warmer orangish red, maybe a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit less saturated. Bring down the RGB intensity and just hit that color fill object a few times, and then maybe blend that together. And let's mask by curvature. Let's bring up the strength a little bit. Maybe bring it down. And just play with this a little bit. Kind of a similar mask there, so I'm going to invert that. And just a little bit of a magenta. And let's see what we get out of mask by peaks and valleys. That's pretty good. So I'm going to invert that mask and fill that in with a black. So, and then maybe blend this together a little bit. So that's just kind of a starting place for my poly paint. If you watched me do this last week, I did kind of a similar thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my stroke type to color spray. Set the color variance down to 0 and pick up an alpha, like maybe alpha 7. And let's get a redder red. And start to, I'm going to clear the mask and just start to kind of paint over this, just to blend. And get a redder in the center. And maybe bring up the RGB intensity a little bit. And kind of paint around like this. I think I mentioned this last time. If you want to use them, there are blend modes for poly paint. I'll show you in just a second. Let me add just a little bit more red here, and a little bit more red here, and a little bit more red here, maybe down here and centered. and something like this. And I'm gonna choose maybe more of a purplish color. And I'm gonna go to the brush palette. Let me see if I can remember this under modifiers. I think it's under alpha and texture. Polypaint mode, this little missing slider. If I hover over it, you can see polypaint mode 1 equals standard. So just regular paint. 2 is colorized, 3 is multiply, 4 is lighten, and 5 is darken. So let's see what happens if I set this to 3. And I want to paint on the sides here that magenta color. So you can see in this case it's not overwriting those dark areas. Instead, this is like a multiply mode that you might find like in Photoshop or something like that, right? So that dark detail that I had before remains because I'm just basically multiplying the darkness of the purple on top of that. So that could be kind of a cool effect. And I know it's going to get really dark here, but that's okay because I'm going to do a number of passes in the poly paint until I'm happy with it. Something in this kind of thing. You know, not getting too hung up on the colors that I paint on here because I like to just keep adding colors and experimenting until it gets to the point where I like it. And let's see here. Nice bit of splash of purple. This photograph right here is insane. I mean, there's obviously a high level of metallicity, but you even get like green reflections right here in the yellow parts. It's a real, and I think a lot of these colors are also based on angles of incidence. I'm painting the color directly onto here, but you know, if I do a final redshift render and say Maya or something like that, I could always add like a ramp to the angle of incidence in the reflection and get a similar kind of effect. But I like to also paint the colors on here as well. So what I'm going to do is I want to have the abdomen be like this bright red and purple and then the body green, and then this in between is going to go from maybe like a red to black to a greenish color right there, so that you have this nice, or maybe what I'll do is this will be like red, black in the middle, maybe green over here, so it's kind of a gradient heading back towards the body, which I think that will look kind of cool and also draw attention to the abdomen. I don't know if I'm going to do discrete stripes on the abdomen like you would see on a hornet. I think I'm going to keep it more of a color. I mean, and it looks like I'm really overdoing it here, the variation color, but as I add more layers of colors, and then also as we render it with a Redshift with a really metallic shader, you'll see that the transitions kind of, well, let's just do it now so you can see what I'm talking about. So, of course, we've got to save next. Drink some beer. And I'm going to go over to render. Let's turn on Redshift render. And I'll leave the rest of these at the default for the moment. Switch over to a Redshift material, this metallic one. I think I was using simple metal, anisotropic last time. And let's do, actually, yeah, that should work. Do BBR. And give it a few moments to load the geometry into memory. And then let's see how those colors work. This is the simple metal anisotropic is a polypaint material, so we should see that polypaint color come through. Let's see if that actually happens. If not, we'll use a different material. All right. A few more moments here. Next render shouldn't be quite as slow. All right, we're not seeing any of that red color, so let's use a different material. Let's see, simple metal brushed. Let's try that. Okay, that one will probably work better. I guess the Redshift polypaint materials overwrite the polypainting, which is kind of a weird way to do it. Alright, preparing to render. I know this seems slow, but I used to have to render in Mental Ray, and those days were incredibly slow. You'd like draw a little render region and wait 20 minutes just to see how it came out. That was no fun. And of course we had to do it in the snow, uphill, with a mouthful of porcupine quills. There we go. So you can see that even though without the material, when I'm just painting with that white material, it looks like the difference between the red and the purple is really extreme. But the minute I throw in this metallic shader, you can see that it's now a very subtle transition from the orange-red to the purple. So that's why I'm going to continue to kind of make it really exaggerate the difference in the hues here so that it comes through when we have that metallic shader. So another technique I like to use is I'll switch over to this alpha right here and increase my RGB intensity. And let's pick like a brighter red, more saturated red, maybe even this kind of color. Let's see. And bring up the RGB intensity. No, I don't like that because that's coming out like brown or something. Let's back down to here. Takes a little bit of finagling here. Let's see, is it actually doing anything? Yes, it is doing something. I need to pick maybe yellow. Here we go. Here we go. Blur that a little bit. So yeah, if you examine images of insects really close up, or anything natural, you're going to see there's a lot more going on color-wise than initially meets the eye. There's a lot of blending of different colors, and it can be quite subtle sometimes. This isn't super subtle, but as I said, once you throw the shader on, it'll be harder to see the transition. So I'm going to just mess around with a bunch of different colors in here. It might come out a little bit green, but that's okay. I think also, let's make sure I switch the color mode back. I think that's what's also causing a problem. Okay, let's go back to 1 here. There we go. That's what the problem was. I still had my polypaint mode at multiply, so it wasn't giving me exactly what I wanted. So this is what I want. There we go. Thank you. It's always something. Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for. Get little speckles in there on top of the darker colors. Let's turn off Lazy Mouse. I think this is part of the other geometry poking through there. So I'm going to fix that. Here, bring this up a little bit lighter. some of that orange back. A little blur, a little more brighter orange on top of that blurred part. Gives it kind of a nice natural look to it. Looks like a mess, but that's okay. Let's take a look at how this looks as rendered. Simple metal brushed, right? Yeah. Yeah, so it's nice kind of transition of colors there. That metallic shader, I think it looks pretty cool. The yellows to the purples. It's pretty neat. I'm going to get a little bit brighter up here. And let's do a little pink around the edges here. Then what we could do is, like, I lost a lot of my darker detail. That's okay. We can go in here, mask peaks and valleys, and let's bring down the range to 2. Let's bring it up to 6. Let's try 8. Okay, kind of like that. I'm going to invert the mask, hide it, go down here, really dark color, and just bring that back a little bit. That nice kind of detail going there in the color based on the detail that I sculpted in there. Looks pretty cool. Clear the mask, and I'm going to bring some of that pink down in here. Let's see what it looks like. That looks like when you render it. Let me peaks and valleys, invert, hide. Another thing that might be nice is let's bring some of the, just do a little bit of lighter color on top of this darker bit. Oops, let's clear the mask. Just to blend it a little bit more, so it's not absolutely dark. You get some of that purple coming back. Let's make it a bit more purple. Pink, pinky purple. And let's give that a render. Thank you, Lucas. I'm enjoying it. Never get tired of doing insects. It's always fun. Like I said, flowers are also a lot of fun too. Flowers are pretty, but they're also very complex, especially the colors. Yeah, so I think that looks pretty cool. So it's not, again, with that metallic shader, it's not quite so, it's much more subtle, even though without the metallic shader, it's not subtle at all. Sometimes you gotta amp it up a little bit. So let's save next. Where'd it go? And I want to work on this pedicel, or the part between the abdomen and the thorax. All right, so fun insect facts for today. Ants had a common ancestor with wasps. They diverged from wasps in the late Cretaceous era. And all ants basically derived from sort of an ant-wasp hybrid named Spicomyrma. Myrma is Greek for ant, and the Greek suffix for ant, and it was sort of an in-between. I don't want to say missing link because that's kind of a loaded term, but basically what's cool about this is that it was theorized that ants had evolved from or had a common ancestor with wasps in the late Cretaceous for a while, or around that era. But an actual fossil was found, not a fossil, but the actual, a specimen of this Spicomyrma was found encased in amber. It was found by a couple, married couple. They were amateur entomologists and paleontologists. And these are the kind of people that like to wander around on the beach looking at rocks and other things and fossils. I don't know if you know people like that, but I know some people like that. They were in New Jersey, and they had found this wasp encased in amber, and they sent it to famed entomologist E.O. Wilson at Harvard, one of my big heroes. And apparently when he received it, he was examining it and, of course, dropped it and shattered the amber. But luckily, it didn't shatter it in any place where the specimen was actually, so it didn't damage the actual specimen. But let's see if we can find a picture of it online. I mean, where do I get these stories? Well, I read a lot of books by E.O. Wilson, and he has tales like this. So this is what it actually looked like. Spicomyrma. And how do they know that this is a common ancestor from wasps and ants? Well, science. Obviously, they didn't immediately know it. They had to study it. Cool Dino facts. There you go. So, anyways, you can read more about it, but it's pretty cool. There you go. Fun ant wasp fact for the day. Okay, so now the challenge is to paint this part, which is, in my model, is based on a mud dauber wasp, which is very different from an ant. So I'm selecting this color, bring up the RGB intensity, and choose color, fill object. So now I'm going to go in here and start to sample this dark color. Let's get some detail in there. Do masking, mask by cavity. Let's play with the profile a little bit. I love playing with these graphs here. I'm going to invert that mask and do color, fill object. Let's get down below 100 intensity. Let's play with mask by smoothness. It's kind of similar. Mask by smoothness, invert. Sorry. Hello. Okay, that's being stubborn. Let's see what mask by curvature gives us. It's kind of the same. It always depends on the kind of the style of detail, if you're going to get that much of a different mask or not. Mask by peaks and valleys. I'm going to hide this, and I'm going to do a kind of a purplish color. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to this alpha, get kind of a darker black here, and kind of just start painting right here. Whoops. So this is where lock screen comes in handy. So turn on lock screen and do this kind of thing. Maybe straight up black here in the middle. And then sample a green. Let's bring up the RGB intensity. Not too much. Let's turn on this a little. Clear the mask here. With that darker green. Cool, I'm glad you enjoyed my bug obsession. Like I said, I've been doing bugs not completely exclusively, but a lot for the past 10 years. I still haven't really got tired of them yet. I already have plans of what I'm going to do in my upcoming live stream after I finish this bug. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to bring this black up a little bit further. I just want a little bit of green at the front here, the front end. Yeah, I'm kind of digging this guy or gal. If I give it a stinger, it's a gal. So I might, I definitely want to, once I finish painting it, I'm going to do some renders in using Redshift here in ZBrush. Maybe I'll make a little flower or something like that for it to stand on. But it would be fun also to rig and animate this in like Maya or maybe Blender. I'm a lot faster in Maya than I am in Blender, but I'm trying to force myself to make that transition to Blender. It's just, it's one of those, it's like learning another language. You kind of have to immerse yourself into it to actually get the hang of it. The problem is that, if I have a job comes up that requires, animation, my go-to is Maya because that's what I'm fast at. So it's taken me a while to make that transition to Blender. Bringing in a little bit of purple here and maybe a little bit of green, just so it looks like there's a kind of a cool transition. Thanks for the comments, everybody. It's very encouraging. Sometimes I feel like my bug session is like making me like one of those weird dudes in X-Files that, Mulder always had to call up when they had a special case. The dude who did nothing but sit in his basement and talk about bugs. Well, that's me. I'm gonna bring in mass peaks and valleys again. Nope, too much. That's my curvature. And I'm going to hide it. Wait, invert it, and then hide it. And bring back some of that detail. Little black spots. And let's take a look. Save next. And let's do a render. Redshift. Kind of cool. It's kind of going in the direction that I want. Yeah, one of the things about focusing on insects is it gave me a chance to explore different areas of ZBrush that I might not have discovered had I kind of stuck with just doing like characters or props or something like that. And a lot of these techniques that I learn, I do bring into my other work because I'm freelance here in LA, so I do all kinds of different jobs, not just bugs. I always like when I get to do bugs in a job. It's kind of like a win-win, but but a lot of these techniques I find can be very useful in other stuff. If you've seen the movie, I'm going to plug some stuff I've done before just for fun. What the heck? If you've seen the movie 10 Cloverfield Lane, at the very end, the big monster, big boss monster is something that I got to model and polypaint when I was working at Bad Robot, and that was a lot of fun. I used a lot of these same techniques in both modeling it, although that was a bit more of a squashy thing than a carapace thing, but definitely a lot of the polypaint techniques that I'm using now, I used it back on that model, even though that was almost 10 years ago, 2015. But I was very pleased with the way it came out. It's a fun movie to work on. Yeah, I kind of like that. I mean, it's a little bit more orange than I had intended, but I don't know if I dislike that. I mean, I kind of like it. I might have to bring a little bit more purple in there just to match the eyes a bit more. Let's see from a different view what this looks like. I'll turn on perspective as well. Yeah, if you're going to start doing insects, ants are a great one to start with because they are kind of the most straightforward in terms of understanding the anatomy of an insect, but ants are far from boring. If you take a look at the variety of ant faces out there, it's insane, and the level of detail is very, very crazy. I would recommend also taking the time to reading a little bit about the insect that you're doing so you have an understanding. It's a great book, For the Love of Insects, which talks a lot about insect chemical defenses and other things, aspects of insects, and that was by Eisner. I think it's Kingdom of the Ants by E.O. Wilson is a really great kind of nice condensed version of some of the work he did on superorganisms, so I highly recommend that book as well. A lot of just crazy, crazy stories in there, especially when he talks about how ants go to war with each other. So that's a good one to check out. So I like this, but well, I don't know. I like the transition. I think it works pretty well. Let's see a side view. Turn off perspective for a second. And let's get a light. Edit the light in here. I'm going to boost, go to light properties, or sorry, Redshift light properties. It may be increase the intensity multiplier. And let's see how bright that comes out. No, it looks about the same. Let's try this. I'm going to go into textures, and I'm going to import. And let's see. Let's go to projects. Find an HDRI that. Rolling Hills. Let's try that one. That's what it looks like. I'm going to go into light. Let's see. Go to background. And then I'm going to go to light. And now that I have this loaded, I'm going to turn this off. It's still going to use this to light the scene, but it won't show up in the background, so it'll just show up in the model. Yeah, I can see a little bit of reflection there of the scene. I think. I'll bring up the exposure a little bit. There we go. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. All right. Let's move on. You know, I might come back to this. Maybe there's too much green right here. I kind of wanted more black to red. Let's see. That's kind of what I have more in my mind. Okay, well, we can always come back to it. Let's go to... Not ready to do the legs quite yet. I want to do wings. Specifically the wing membrane. So let's go to the reference, folks. So this is where we have to kind of separate in our minds the wing membrane from the wing veins. So you can see there is color variation on the veins. It's a little bit hard to see here. Let's see. This one, the wing veins are almost straight up black. But there is a little bit of color variation there. A little bit of that metallic quality. That's the wing membrane. So, you know, the trick is to kind of separate this stuff in your mind. Oh, you know what? I just realized I do kind of like that color on the very end edge of the abdomen there. The different tergites. That's kind of interesting because, I mean, I have that. I'm just going to maybe bring that back a little bit later on. But let's worry about the wings next. Let's take a look at some more. So here they're more of a translucent kind of brown and yellow, but that's also because this is a less of a metallic wasp. That's a spider. That's katydid. Yeah, the wings in this one are black and not always transparent. Okay, so I think I'm going to go for darker colors, maybe kind of 1974 Phase 4. I know that Them is a very famous movie about ants. Phase 4. Wait, is that... Yes, that's 4, right. Ooh. I've heard of this movie, but I have not seen it, so I'll have to check it out. What I would suggest to you is if you go to YouTube and check out Ants, Nature's Secret Power. That's a great documentary that's available for free on YouTube. Someone went crazy with the slow motion photography there. Alright, I have to check that out. Today the earth was turned into a cemetery. Of course, you know, another interesting ant fact, if you took the biomass of all the ants in the world and weighed that, the biomass of all the ants in the world would be equal to the biomass of all the humans in the world. So in this case, the earth would be turned into a cemetery, but it's a people cemetery, not necessarily an ant cemetery. It's more like an ant restaurant, right? But if you go to Ants, Nature's Secret Power, this is a great yeah, this one right here, BBC documentary. Is that the same one that I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of a Nova episode. Anyways, that's a cool one. This might be part 2. Anyways, it's a really cool episode of Nova that's worth checking out. Uh-oh, he's got the thing. He's turning the switches. This is the worst part right there. Oh no, look out for the owl. Ready? Okay. Enough of that goofiness. Okay, so let's do a dark color here to contrast with the body, but I'll bring in some of these colors as well. So I'm going to do C, and what are we looking at? 2 million. Do I have any detail on here? I don't have much detail, so maybe I need to hold off on the painting and sculpt a little bit of detail. So I'm going to go and let's let's load a material here. Let's go to okay, get my famous blue material here. Whoops. Yeah, because there's not much detail here, and that's a little disappointing. So let's go back to sculpting mode here, and I'm going to get out my S-cloth and just start to the actual detail here, and where the wing veins meet the body is kind of not something I'm a complete expert on, so I'm kind of, this is a little bit of sci-fi here. Let me turn on Z-add for my smooth brush. I can actually smooth things. But, so I'm going to fake it a little bit and throw in some kind of like nifty looking bulges and other kinds of stuff. Kind of like I have at the bottom here. You can see I started doing it, but I did not finish. I'm going to divide this, get it up to 4 million. There we go. That's nice. I'm kind of using the inflate brush because I like how it gives this kind of like blobby kind of stuttery look to it. So I'm kind of going over quickly with the inflate. And a little bit smooth here. Because I don't want this to look too smooth. It'll look mechanical, and I don't want it to look mechanical. I'm going to go down a couple steps and maybe thin this out a little bit with a smooth brush. Alright, just kind of doing this quickly Just add a little bit more variation here and keep it looking organic. And let's see. Okay. Now let's add a little bit of surface noise here. Let's do this real quick. Go down to surface, noise, zoom in. Then I had, yes. Sometimes I forget to put on symmetry. Let's play with this a little bit, just to make it slightly more interesting. Let's get the noise scale up there. Yes, like this. I choose OK. And let's apply to mesh. And choose noise, edit. Let's bring up the scale a little bit. Okay. Mesh, a little bit of seam there so we can smooth that out. And just go in here and just enhance some of the detail a little bit. Kind of Geiger-esque in a way, a little bit. Okay. Fussing a little bit too much. Okay, so that looks pretty cool. Let's save that baby. And we'll do some painting in just a sec. Okay. Let's go back to the white material. Whoops, that's not the material. Where to go? All right. I lost my skin shade 4. I guess I overwrote it when I imported that material. That's no fun. I'm going to matte cap gray and modifiers. That's fine. White is white. Okay, so let's select that dark color. Well, that's just black, isn't it? And now I'm going to choose color, fill object. Let's go back to our paint. Damn that home page. Paintbrush. And let's do something different. I could just bring in the green here, but that might be boring. Let's bring in some of that red. What I would do, the way I do my coloring workflow or my texturing workflow is I'm basically essentially coloring what I would consider the base color, the albedo, diffuse, whatever you want to call it. And if I'm doing a full workflow where I want to bring this in to render into Maya or whatever, then what I'm going to do is paint my color maps and also, and then set up my UVs. So do the UVs partially in ZBrush, partially in Maya or Blender or whatever UV program you want to do. Bring those UVs back into ZBrush, and you can do that by simply loading in your model that has UVs. As long as the point order is the same, you can go into the Z plugin under UV master and copy UVs from the imported model and paste them back into this model, the lowest subdivision level, right? So then I have my UVs matching between my Maya, Blender, whatever, and ZBrush, right? And then what I would do is use those UVs, export my textures using multi-map exporter, texture from polypaint, create my texture maps from that. You know, you can even use UDIMs. Your UDIMs won't show up in ZBrush. You know, if you try and preview them, they'll all be like on top of each other, but it doesn't matter because when it makes the textures, it will actually export textures appropriately for all your UDIMs. And you can go in here under export options and your file names and set up how you want this to be named if you're using UDIMs. So you can set this up to like UDIM, right? That would be like 1001, 1011, etc. And then basically I would export my color maps, and I also create my displacement maps in ZBrush because the displacement map baker is still really good in ZBrush. Bring all those out, And then I would export a high poly version of the model, probably decimate it so it's not too bad, because my high poly can get, this is 71 million for the entire model, so I'd probably decimate that. But I would also export my low poly version with UVs. So I have a low poly version with UVs, high poly version, doesn't matter if it has UVs, it could be decimated with or without them, that doesn't matter. Bring those into Substance Painter, or you could also use Marmoset. Bake out my other textures, so normal, occlusion, curvature, thickness, etc. And also bring in all the color maps that I've exported from ZBrush into Substance or Marmoset, and then using the painting tools, enhance the base color, you know, maybe take advantage of some of those painting tools to bring it up another level. And then also use, you know, paint my roughness maps, sometimes opacity maps, because sometimes you want variations in opacity in the wings and that kind of stuff. All those other texture maps, and then export everything from Substance, bring that into Maya, hook it up to Redshift shader or whatever shader you're using. If you're using Arnold V-Ray, doesn't matter as long as you don't use Octane, because it's evil. But you could use Redshift or any of those other ones, and then basically that's what I would render. You could actually export the high poly version of the model with the poly paint into Redshift and use their, you know, vertex paint node to generate the textures without having to set up UVs or any of that kind of thing. That's basically, you know, vertex color is basically using the poly paint data, and you could do that also in Keyshot. In Keyshot, that works really well, actually. One of the things I like about using Keyshot is it's great for doing test renders, especially if you had to get something quick for client approval, because you can do, you know, if you have bridge from ZBrush to Keyshot, it works really well and really quickly. You don't have to necessarily set up UVs and all that kind of stuff. You can just send it over to Keyshot, do a quick render, even use the vertex color so that your poly paint comes through in Keyshot, and that works really well too. Of course, another option is if you have Redshift for ZBrush, you can render like I've been doing tonight with if you just want to get like test renders or client approval or something like that, you could render Redshift images from ZBrush very quickly without necessarily having to set up textures and UVs and all that kind of good stuff. The downside, of course, is that Redshift for ZBrush is great, except that you don't have the advantage of like a real node editing shader setup. So your shaders are going to be pretty simple, and you're kind of stuck with the Redshift version of, or the ZBrush version of Redshift. But again, you don't necessarily have to export textures, so it's a huge time saver. So hopefully that gives you some answer to your question. But you know, I spent a lot of time over the years developing different texture workflows. I was using Marmoset for a while. If you check out my Gnomon DVD, so if you're giving me an opportunity to plug it, this actually shows a lot of my workflow. So go to the Gnomon workshop, and what's new in Chrome? The Gnomon workshop is new in Chrome. There we go. If you go to browse, 15% off. It's an incredible deal, guys. Browse by instructor. Go to me, Eric Keller. I have several insect, two insect and one spider workshops, but this one is the most recent one. I did this with ZBrush and Marmoset toolbag. So this is a orchid mantis, and I do the whole thing from beginning, you know, Z-sphere block out all the way to final render in Marmoset. But I do talk about how I do my poly paint in ZBrush, work with the UV texture coordinates, and then baking the texture in Marmoset. You can use the same workflow in Substance, but it's the same idea. And actually, I think this one I did in Octane, similar kind of thing, poly painting and UVs and all that kind of stuff. And then also this spider one. A similar idea. This one I believe I rendered. Yeah, this one I rendered in Redshift with Yeti. So you can see I like to use lots of different rendering engines just to learn them, and just because they all have their benefits and drawbacks, and so I just like experimenting with different rendering options. But again, this is the same thing. This one I use Substance. So this is a ZBrush Substance Redshift for Maya workflow, and also Yeti for the fur. So hopefully that answers your question. But the reason I like to do the poly painting in ZBrush as opposed to just painting the model in Substance or Marmoset, which you could do as well, is I just like the brushes in ZBrush. I think are the easiest to use for painting. It's very easy to blend and blur colors and all that kind of stuff, and it's a little bit more of a straightforward workflow, so that's why I like to do that. Yeah, see, I kind of like this because this is giving us really the red right here, and this purplish red is a nice complement to the green. Almost a complement. I guess straight up purple would be a complement to the green, but you know, you see this kind of red and green in nature a lot, especially with flowers, this kind of dichotomies. But this does a nice job of kind of highlighting the thorax and the head, but also sort of, you know, giving sort of a triangle of color there, which I kind of like. So let's see what this looks like when I render with Redshift. And let's save. What's the best way to import an insect model from ZBrush to Substance Painter and then Maya? Okay, so the best way to do it is, like I said, make sure first of all that your ZBrush model has UVs. So if you lay out the UVs in Maya or whatever, you can, like I said, you know, export the low poly version of all the subtools. Bring, like I usually do that as an FBX. I bring that into Maya. I finish editing my UVs. I use UDIMs a lot. And then once I'm finished that in Maya, I'll re-export as an FBX. I'll import that FBX into ZBrush. So I'll have my poly-painted original ZBrush model, and I'll have my imported model with UVs. And then I'll go subtool by subtool. It's not too bad. It really only takes about 20 minutes or so. Subtool by subtool using the UV Master plugin, which comes with ZBrush. Copy and paste UVs from one subtool to the next. So that way now I have my final ZBrush model with UVs on the lowest subdivision level. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Got my lowest subdivision model with UVs. Now export that as an FBX, as my low poly model. And I'll bring that into Substance or Marmoset. That's what I'm going to use in Substance or Marmoset because it's got all the UVs in the right place and everything. Now, what about baking a high poly version? So now what I'll do is I'll go back into ZBrush and I'll decimate. I'll set everything in the highest subdivision level. I'll decimate them all so that I don't have a crazy number of points. On the high poly model, it doesn't matter if you have UVs. You can decimate and keep UVs if you really want to. With the high poly model, it doesn't really matter if you have UVs, because when I'm going to export that as an FBX, bring that into Substance, and then bake from that. And when you're baking in Substance, the low poly model obviously has to have UVs because it's got to create the textures, right? But the high poly model, it's just looking at the high poly model, the cage there, to create the normal maps and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a laborious workflow, but the payoff is that you end up with high quality textures and high quality UVs. And also, I always like to have my models consistent in terms of the UVs. So my ZBrush model, my Maya model, my Substance model, they all have the same UVs. It's very helpful to do that if you need to go back and well, work with the model, or sometimes I'll end up selling the model to a client or something like that. And it's helpful if they all have the same UVs, because it makes it a better model, a better value for them, and whatever. But I also like to have a library of models that have consistent UVs. In case something happens to the Maya model, you don't lose your version with the UVs on it, or vice versa, or whatever. Okay, so what was I doing? Oh yeah, I was rendering it through Redshift. And let's go to that metal material. Simple metal brush. And PPR. Let's see how it looks. Ooh, see, I think it's looking pretty nice. It's looking very nice. Yeah, I like the way that red looks on the wing veins. So now let's play with the membrane a little bit, and of course this is like, wow, the possibilities are kind of endless for how we want to do the membranes. Obviously with many insects you have a transparent membrane with maybe like, shading. It has a little bit of kind of that rainbow kind of quality, that iridescence to it. But like with insect models, the wings, the sky's the limit. Sometimes you have wasps that have just plain dark, opaque wings. Let me see. Here's a good example. A little bit of color on there, even though you can see it's got a lot of depth of field blurring. Often you'll have patterns. This is a cicada, obviously, but you can have these patterns on wasps as well. Let's see. Semi-transparent, although you want to paint a little bit of color on there. That would be like bees and many hornets like that. This one I think is semi-transparent, but just a hint of metallic quality and a little bit of color on there. So I like to paint some color in ZBrush. Here's kind of a reddish color. Again, just hints of color, even though it's mostly transparent. This is why you might want to paint an opacity map in Substance, so that some of that diffuse color comes through, and then you could plug it. If you turn up the metallicity, then you have a metallic color quality on the wings. Here's a good example. I mean, you can tell from the side view, even though it's hard to see the membrane, that this is an opaque blue metallic wing right here. So here's a transparent wing. That was a crazy bug. Here is a more of a transparent but a yellowish quality, little hints of color here and there on a metallic bug. Here's an almost completely transparent wing on something that resembles our mud dauber type wasp. This one's cool because it has a bit more segmentation on this part right here. Maybe I'll steal that. I don't know. I kind of like the where it is, where ours is. But what I think I want to do is I want to do semi-transparent. So I want to do a fade into maybe more transparent on the outer edges, but less transparent on the inner part. So, but what I'll do is I'm going to worry about any kind of opacity mapping. Maybe I'll do that in Substance. So for the ZBrush version, I'm going to just go ahead and do a straight up coloring. Although we can also create a Redshift material with transparency in ZBrush and see how that looks. Let's see. So let's go in here, and I'm going to turn on solo and see where I left this. Bring it to the highest subdivision level. Yeah, it's at 3 million. And let's go back to this material right here. Okay, so you got 3 million. Now this is pretty good, but I think there's a little bit more detail that's lacking here that we can add in. And if you look at a lot of insect wings. If you look at really super close up, which we're not going to, oh, you can almost get it. You can see there are actually hairs growing out of the membrane of the wing. Right? You can see there are little hairs here. There's definitely hairs growing out of there. So I might not necessarily do the hairs, but there is also more detail here in kind of some of that pitting and that kind of stuff. So I think I want to add that before I do any painting on here. So do a little bit more sculpting. Excuse me. Let's turn off polypaint right here. And to do this, I'm going to go into, let's get the old Damien standard brush. And I'm going to set this to, say, like this alpha right here. And I'm going to set the stroke type to, let's do drag dot so we can keep consistent size. So I'm going to bring up the draw size a little bit, maybe the Z intensity, and let's make sure that we have, yes. And I'm not doing a spray stroke because I do want control over where these things are. Now, you know what, I changed my mind. I want these to be smaller. They're too small. That's good. And I'm kind of, you know, it's not perfectly the same distance, but it's close to the same distance from each dot, which I think gives it a nice kind of pattern to it. You could also probably devise like a surface noise to do something similar, although that's going to be a lot of futzing. At the end of the day, I am kind of a digital sculptor, so I'm going to sculpt these details as my kind of go-to. Excuse me for the yawning. Of course, these are going to be perfectly symmetrical, but it's okay. If you ever get worried that you're in the Matrix, you know, in reality it's just a simulation, go look at some bugs and see if the dots on their wings are perfectly symmetrical. If that's the case, then you know some lazy computer programmer has created the simulation that we all live in. And, well, I don't know what you do with that information, but at least you know, you can be certain that we live in a simulation created by somebody, right? But you'll also be disappointed understanding that whoever created the universe is too lazy to turn off symmetry and sculpt details on both sides of the insect wings. So that might be a huge disappointment, an existential crisis of some kind, you know. But of course, you had to look at all the bugs because maybe they were just lazy in some of the bugs, but they did a better job on other bugs. So that means you need to examine all bugs to make sure that the details aren't perfectly symmetrical on every single insect on the earth, if you want to be absolutely certain that we're not living in a simulation created by a lazy artist. So get on that. Worst case scenario, you end up with a lot of macro photography you can share on Instagram. It is interesting to see how macro photography has taken off on Instagram. You know, because I follow a lot of insect photographers who are old school, been around since the days of analog photography, and I really appreciate their work and their dedication, because these guys are out there, you know, crawling through the mud and stuff. I'm always a little bit suspicious if I see a wildlife photographer or an insect photographer that's really handsome or good looking and has it together and they have good makeup on and everything. I'm like, come on. Real bug photographers are sweaty and nasty, and they're nerds, and they've been, you know, outcast by the rest of society years ago, so they're not going to be pretty people. They're some of my favorite people, though, and some of my good friends, so I think they're beautiful. But, you know, you can also tell in the photography, if a picture of an insect that you see in macro photography is telling a story, then it's more likely from an experienced photographer that knows what they're doing. If it's just a pretty picture of a pretty bug, you can learn how to do that pretty quickly. Take a few workshops, get some decent camera equipment, go out there in the field, and you can take a lot of very pretty but somewhat boring pictures that don't really tell a story. They just say, hey, look what a great photographer I am. And that's kind of disappointing, you know. If you study with somebody like Alex Wilde or some of my favorites, Nikki Bay, Thomas Shahan, these guys, John and Kendra Abbott, and those folks, you know, once you've taken a few nice, pretty pictures from like top down of some ladybugs or whatever, you're going to sort of run out of ideas really quickly, and your photography might look great, but it also looks like everybody else's. So that's when you need to get down on your knees and start taking pictures from the level of the insect. And these are the kinds of things that I think about when I do renderings of CG bugs, right? You want to get down at sort of eye level or below so that you're seeing the world from the insect's point of view. That's when you're starting to tell a story. And of course, you also want to think about the interaction of the environment. What's the interaction with the plants? What's the interaction with other insects in the scene? Those are the things that start to make insect photography and also insect rendering interesting. It's just like when you see a movie and you see a monster and the monsters just come out and say "rawr." You know, a real predator in the real world is going to be silent, right? Because why would they want to come up and scream at the thing that they're trying to eat? They don't want the thing that they're trying to eat to run away, right? So if it wants to eat you, it's not going to come up and roar. It's going to sneak up. Just watch nature videos of cheetahs and leopards and lions and stuff. And it's going to be super, super stealthy up till the very last moment when it pounces on you, right? So I don't understand these monster movies or aliens where the aliens come up and start screaming at the thing it's going to eat. The reason it would scream at you is as if it wants you, if it felt threatened, right? Feels like you're a threat, then it's going to try and make itself larger and scarier as possible, right? That's why you want to make noises with bears, from what I hear. Don't take bear advice from me, by the way. Or if it feels like you're infringing on its territory, then it's going to come up and say, hey, I want to fight because I want to get you the hell away from me, or away from my territory, or away from my mate, or whatever, or my children. So, I don't know. Believe it or not, there's a lot of interesting interaction between insects, even non-social insects, solitary insects, especially when it comes to mating and that kind of stuff. Yeah, awesome creatures that scream. It's lame. I mean, it's great shock value for the audience, but, you know, the movie Predator. What is the Predator doing? He's sneaking around, man. He's invisible. Insects are the same way. Look at dragonflies. Dragonflies are not very loud because they are the ultimate insect predators, you know. But if you look at, like, you know, insects, even flies can get territorial. Great example is a stalk-eyed fly. Those things are really cool. Just take a moment to appreciate the stalk-eyed fly. I have a model of one somewhere, but I never finished it. These crazy mofos, right? Look at that. These are the eyes. These are not antennae. And these are the males. And they actually, you know, your first assumption is like, oh, okay, well, this obviously has some kind of benefit to the way that the insect sees. But remember, vision for insects is a secondary sense. It's not their primary sense. And stalk-eyed flies, these things actually grow out. I think they fill these things with fluid and they push them out. So a stalk-eyed fly might actually start with the eyes close to the head and gradually move them out. So why are they doing this? Because they're extremely territorial. So this fly right now, this leaf is its territory and it's guarding it, and it goes up against other stalk-eyed flies. And so their entire territory might be one plant, and they're fending it off. They're fighting other males for dominance, protecting their territory and protecting their mates. It's pretty cool. So insect behavior, even something as humble as a little fly, can be quite sophisticated. And, you know, E.O. Wilson used to talk about how even some of the ants that squirt acid out of their butts, you know, I want to say weaver ants, but it might not be weaver ants. You know, he would have them in his laboratory on the table, and they would recognize him as a person, as a threat, and make visual, you know, contact with this giant lumbering primate, and actually turn around and shoot acid at it. This is really amazing. You know, they're not, obviously not completely oblivious to what's going on. Depends on the ant. Some ants are pretty oblivious to human beings and really large animals, but not all. I did get a chance when I was at Bugshot, Mozambique, hanging out with some cool photographers, to actually see stalk-eyed flies in action. Of course, it was on the edge of a swamp, which is, it's never a good idea to be on the edge of a swamp in Africa, because, you know, crocodiles. But there was a group of us there, and we had a guide who actually had a shotgun who was keeping watch. But it was really cool. I have a nice picture on my wall of the stalk-eyed fly that I took. So I got to finish that model because they're really cool. I was supposed to go to Bugshot in Brazil right about the time the pandemic hit, but it got canceled for obvious reasons. I think they're going to be doing it again soon. I don't know if I'm going to have the money or time to do it, but it would be nice. I'd love to go to Brazil and see the bioluminescent termite mounds. Of course, the bioluminescence is not the termites, it's the beetles that also live in the mounds. While I'm rambling here incoherently, you know, fireflies are not flies, they're actually a type of beetle. And it's thought that their bioluminescent actually originally was not necessarily a mating thing, so it's evolved into being a mating sequence type deal, right? So they flash a particular sequence to attract the mate of the right species. But I've read that it's theorized that it actually started as a warning, the same way a brightly colored insect warns predators that it tastes bad or is poisonous or whatever, don't eat me, is thought that maybe that bioluminescence was a warning to predators at night or dusk or whatever. Since it's harder to see colors, why not light up? That way your true colors can be shining through, as Cyndi Lauper might say. That's why I love them, fireflies. But they're beetles, not flies. Okay. So, okay, there we go. So we have a nice, okay, that looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do is add a little bit of noise. This one is fine. Just do a default noise. Apply to mesh. Let's go in here and let's try this. Let's see how this looks. I'm going to go in here and do a clay polish and invert that. And let's do an inflate just to see how this looks. I don't like that. Let's go back to here. I might lower a subdivision level, do a little bit of smoothing here just so they're not so the same. Let's see, go back to 6. Yeah, there's not much of a difference there. All right, let's save that. So I was talking about the fireflies last week. It's actually worse than that. There's one species where they will imitate the signal of another species in order to lure the males so that they can prey on them. So it's Photirus and Photinus, two different genuses of fireflies. And so one firefly will mimic the signal of the other. Because basically at dusk, right, you have fireflies that they occupy the same territory, they're different species, they have different signals, like Morse code, in order to let the male of the species know, hey, I'm a lady, I'm ready to mate, whatever, come on over here. And so they communicate with these signals, right? So the male will see that signal, beep, 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 or whatever, and go over there and get it on with the lady. And everything is wonderful. It's a beautiful evening for everyone. Except for that some of the females of another species have decided, okay, well, I have my own signal for my species, beep, 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 to attract the mates. But I've also figured out how to mimic the signal of a different species so I can attract the male and then eat them. And one of the reasons they do this is because, it takes energy to produce bioluminescent chemicals. If you can steal somebody else's bioluminescent chemicals, that's less energy that has to be expended. So that's why they do that. So they can literally fuel up on that bioluminescent fluid by eating it, which is pretty horrible. I'm going to recommend a book, so just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. The really fantastic book, Silent Sparks, The Wondrous World of Fireflies, 2016 by Sarah Lewis. Highly recommend it. Beautiful photography, really awesome stories about fireflies the world over. Totally recommend it. And then you get interesting, fascinating tales like that one. And more information on fireflies. So highly recommend that one. Of course, I'm in LA, so there are fireflies here in California, but believe it or not, they are the kind that only glow underground, so we don't see them like we do on the East Coast, different species. So kind of a shame, because I grew up on the East Coast and I miss my fireflies. I don't miss anything else by the East Coast, but I do miss the Fireflies. Okay, so let's do some painting on here, and I think I want to do is let's do some more contrast. Let's do greens and yellows. Let's see how that looks. So I'm going to select my green color here and choose color, fill object. Let's switch back to the paintbrush and go here under, whoops, masking. You know what I'm going to do here. Same thing I've done before. Mask by cavity. Let's invert that and fill that with black. Alright, clear that mask. Let's do mask by smoothness. Probably look kind of the same. Actually, in this case, I'm going to invert the mask. Let's hide the mask. And let's do this kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variations in behaviors of fireflies because there's lots of different species. So there might be another species of firefly that's doing exactly what you're talking about. The chemical defenses in insects, of course, that's one of their main ways of defending themselves. Wasps are a good example. What is the stinger is venom. That's a chemical defense. It's injecting a chemical into you to make your cells explode. With ants, you have ants that shoot acids, and you have ants that shoot bases, which is the opposite of chemical opposite of an acid, right? So fire ants, Solenopsis invicta, will inject you with a necrotizing alkaloid that basically goes in and makes your cells explode, skin cells, which is not fun and feels bad and is a really excellent deterrent. Fire ants will only kill if you are allergic to some of the proteins in the venom. Most people are not. The other interesting thing about fireflies is that people who are attacked most often by fire ants are people who pass out drunk on top of an insect ant mound. So I'm not going to say anything about Florida, but it happens a lot in Florida. I can say that because I went to Florida State University. Okay, so let's do a transition here from green to yellowish green. And bring down the RGB intensity. I'm going to clear the mask. Whoops, clear the mask. I need to read more insect books because I'm running out of stories to tell during my live streams. I think I've told these stories before, but stop me if you've heard this one before. Oh, I think what I'm going to do. Okay. Let's do this. Let's see if I do mask by curvature. Yeah, fire ants are not a joke, but they're cool. There's also, I've heard that, you know, fire ants can attack like an old folks home, and somebody who's bedridden can be basically stung to death. And not very pleasant, but it does happen too. You know. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a little bit of a marking here. Let's select some of this orange. And I'm going to go just on the very tippity tips here. Maybe instead of that, I'll do like a dot. Almost like an eye spot. Again, it's probably a good idea to turn off symmetry, so I'll hit X to turn symmetry off. And maybe I'll sample some of this color just so that my orange spots aren't exactly the same shape or size. And even maybe slight variation in color here. That's kind of cool. I don't know. Maybe. Why not? Let's do a Redshift render. Yeah, ants are really cool, crazy. I did an animation on Entomology Animated that talks about how fire ants sting, and other aspects of fire ants. I did it a few years ago, so it's a little bit old. Let me see if we can pull it up here real quick. Go to Entomology Animated. I'm plugging myself again. So I have a 4-part series on insect division, but I also have this older series on fire ants and bombardier beetle chemistry. So we click on watch this episode. Basically, I talk about fire ants. So this is Solenopsis invicta, and of course I make a really lame joke about how Solenopsis invicta would make a really cool name for a metal band, and there's my death metal band of fire ants. So it's kind of a goofy little video, talks about ant anatomy, and then I get into the, this is a great thing about doing CG is, the skin texture could have been a bit better, I admit that, but but I do a little see-through here of the actual interior anatomy of the abdomen, just focusing on those parts that are related to the stinger. I left out some of the other stomach stuff and all that kind of thing. But it's kind of a cool little mechanism here. And I talk a little bit about the taxonomy, but I also get into the chemistry and how they lay the ant trails. And actually what the protein structure is. So I'm getting super nerdy with this stuff. So this is the protein structure of the venom, and the chemistry a little bit. So if you're curious, you can check it out. It's a good 8 minutes long. So, and I do a little animation here of it actually killing cells inside your skin and all that kind of stuff. So feel free to check that out. Tell your friends. Insect chemistry is cool. And then I did one with a bombardier beetle. It's kind of a similar thing. But yeah, so that's that's where we're at right now. So, yeah, it was a time-consuming joke to create. And I don't know if it. I'm a newbie to the stream. What do you usually use your insect models for? Education stuff? Yeah, I use it for a variety of things, mostly my own entertainment, but also I've been working on a series called Entomology Animated over the past few years, and I haven't updated it in a while, unfortunately, just because life has been very, very crazy the past few years. I cannot emphasize how crazy it's been. Yeah, so I make little videos that talk about insect physiology, stuff that interests me that I think is kind of cool. Like I did a 4-part series on insect vision and also the other stuff. So I'd like to get back into that when I get a chance. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, I mean it's fun. I love doing CG. So when I'm not doing CG for money, I do CG for fun. So I'm doing it all the time whenever I can. And insects are my favorite subject. Although I do other things too. Every once in a while, I'll venture into character models and creature models. Also a big fan of lizards and that kind of stuff. I'm hoping to do a series on damselfly mating because they have a very complex mating setup. There's other things like, how do antennas actually work? Stuff like that. Evolution of flight, insect wings, insect mouth parts is something that I started to work on a while back. So hopefully I'll get into that. It just takes a long time. Actually, the research takes the longest time because you always start with something that's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to explain how an insect eye works, right? And the only problem with that is you start reading the literature and you start to realize, well, there's lots of different types of insect eyes and they all work different ways. And there's always all these different exceptions. So most of the insect eyes work like this, except for a subset that works like that. And even within that subset, it works differently. And it's before you realize that you've got like 2 hours worth of material and you just want to make a 5-minute animation. So it's like that with everything in biology. That's why I love biology. So, hopefully I'll get around to condensing it to a smaller chapter and stuff. So let's see, where are we? Oh, so we got 5 minutes left in the feed. So, or in the stream here. So let's take a look at what I got to do next. I just have to do the hind wings. The hind wings obviously could be very similar to the front wings. Maybe I'll bring some of the orange. It might be nice to have some of the orange here and this back part. So going from the black to the greens and yellows and then an orange part, maybe a larger orange dot right here. I think that might make a nice pattern, and then of course I have to do the legs and I've done the antenna already, so there's the legs. So the legs actually require a little bit more sculpting too. I've just been putting it off. Once I have all of that done, which I think maybe within the next stream or so, I'm going to pose this little one and give it an environment all here in ZBrush, and I'm going to render it Redshift with Redshift lighting. So you can kind of see like a finished, see if I can do like a macro shot of this insect here in ZBrush using Redshift, just as an example, and even maybe exports and passes that can be composited in Photoshop. But I think it's kind of nice to explore how much you can actually do within ZBrush and get a really nice image out without necessarily having to export everything. I'll probably export everything at some point and bring this model into Maya because it's a nice model and I like how it came out. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining me again on this Wednesday, and I should be doing Wednesday evenings in March, 7:30. I think Wednesday is the day for character stuff in ZBrush because the amazing Ashley Adams, of course, usually does her stuff on Wednesday. She does a nice 4-hour live stream, which are always great to watch. And Ian Robinson usually does, I think, a morning live stream, and he does a lot of creature stuff too. So it's a great day to skip work and just watch us talk about creatures for a while, right? But I really like how this one's coming out. I think it looks quite good. I also probably talk about doing some hair with fiber mesh, because hair is the thing that really sells the realism of the insect model. I think it's overlooked a little bit too often when I see other people doing insects. Don't leave out the hair. It's one of the most important things. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week. Thanks again.